course, needs to be agreed by the Russians, and at the moment we have no idea yet how that will be received in Moscow. Now, Steve Witkoff, who's Trump's Middle East envoy, but he's also like a chief negotiator for the Trump administration, it's expected he will fly later in the week to Moscow. It's being reported that he may actually have a meeting with President Putin, where what's been talked about inside the conference room here will be shared in detail with the Russians, and then they, of course, will have to
okay, Alex, we're going to interrupt you actually, because Marco Rubio is speaking. Let's listen to Marco Rubio.
But again, the president's objective here is, number one, above everything else, he wants the war to end. And I think today Ukraine has taken a concrete step in that regard. We hope the Russians will reciprocate.
Well, just to add to the Secretary's comments, the Ukrainian delegation today made something very clear, that they share President Trump's vision for peace. They share his determination to end the fighting, to end the killing, to end the tragic kind of meat grinder of people and national treasure that's happening on the front in Ukraine. Number one. Number two, they made concrete steps and concrete proposals, not only accepting our proposal for a full ceasefire, which you can see the details of which are in our joint statement that we released together, but we also got into substantive details on how this war is going to permanently end. What type of guarantees they're going to have for their long-term security and prosperity, but also really looking at what it's going to take to finally end this, the horrific fighting. The other piece that I just want to make very clear is President Trump started this diplomatic effort in the Oval Office, talking to both leaders, both President Putin and President Zelensky back to back. And now that shuttle diplomacy continues. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Russian side. We have a named delegation in terms of next steps from the Ukrainian side. I will talk to my Russian counterpart in the coming days. Secretary Rubio will be with G7 foreign ministers in the next couple of days. We have the NATO Secretary General in the White House on Thursday, and we'll take the process forward from there. So, as a result of that, and I think as a result of this positive step forward, the president has decided to lift the pause on aid. And on our security assistance to Ukraine going forward. And that's effective immediately.
All right, your colleagues have chosen 3 questioners. Let's start with Alex Marquardt of CNN.
Thank you. Several questions on the ceasefire. We understood that coming into this was a Ukrainian proposal for a partial ceasefire. How did this become an American proposal for an immediate 30-day ceasefire? And to be clear, you're talking about a complete ceasefire across the front line, not just the aerial and maritime ceasefire that the Ukrainians proposed. And then finally, how do you expect to take this to the Russians? Is it Mr. Witkoff, who we understand is heading to Moscow later this week? Will he deliver that to Putin? Will it be President Trump to President Putin? Will it be you and your counterparts? How will that actually happen and when?
Well, on the first point, your question is yes. That's the offer. The offer is to stop the shooting. The goal here is, the only way out to end this war is to negotiate out of it. There's no military solution to this war. The solution to this war and the way to end it and to achieve the president's objective of peace is to negotiate. But before you can negotiate, you have to stop shooting at each other. And that's what the president has wanted to see, and that's the commitment we got today from the Ukrainian side, their willingness to do that. Obviously, now that'll be delivered to the Russians. It'll be delivered to them directly through multiple channels, meaning not only will they obviously see it, it'll be communicated to them through our diplomatic channels, through conversations and other methods, but they'll obviously be well aware. And our hope is that the Russians will say yes, that they will also agree. So the shooting will stop, the killing will stop, the dying will stop, and the talks can begin about how to end this war permanently in a way that's acceptable and enduring for both sides.
Look, there's been all kinds of discussions in terms of different types of ceasefires, There was the deal in terms of grain moving years ago. There's been discussion of halting aerial attacks on each other's infrastructure. The president has made it clear and certainly made it clear to us that all fighting needs to stop. And the Ukrainians have agreed to that proposal. They're ready for peace. And now we'll take that to the Russians and get their response.
All right, next, Jennifer Jacobs, CBS.
Great. Hi. Are you expecting any goodwill gestures from Russia? Do you have a deadline in mind for when you're hoping for them to reciprocate on that? Those two things.
Well, we're going to take the offer to them. We're going to tell them this is what's on the table. Ukraine is ready to stop shooting and start talking. And now it'll be up to them to say yes or no. I hope they're going to say yes. And if they do, then I think we made great progress. If they say no, then we'll unfortunately know what the impediment is to peace here. But the president's been abundantly clear. He wants the shooting to stop. He wants the warfare to stop. He wants the dying and the suffering to stop. And he believes, and rightfully so, that the only way to end this war is to negotiate an end to it. And we think that it's always easier to negotiate an end to the war when people aren't shooting at each other. That's how the president believes. That's what we hope to achieve. The Ukrainians today have expressed their willingness and readiness to do so immediately. We hope the Russians' answer to that will also be yes.
But no deadline set, sir.
Well, the deadline is we hope to do this as soon as possible. Every day that goes by that this war continues, people die, people are bombed, people are hurt on both sides of this conflict. The president wanted this war to end yesterday and the day before. The president's been clear he wants peace, and so we wanted to see it as soon as possible. So our hope is that the Russians will answer yes as quickly as possible so we can get to the second phase of this, which is real negotiations, not never-ending dialogue, talk forever, but real negotiations to end this conflict in a way that's acceptable to both sides, sustainable, and that ensures the stability and security of Ukraine for the long term.
And on the goodwill gesture, is there anything like the return of the stolen children or anything that you're expecting in return?
Look, we've discussed a number of things, prisoner exchanges, folks that were detained and what have you, but the fighting has to stop. I mean, that's what we agreed today. And just think about it. We've gone from if the war is going to end to now how the war is going to end, and this was an important first step, and that was under President Trump's leadership. He has literally moved the entire global conversation to where we had a very senior Ukrainian delegation with us today. We've had engagements with our Russian counterparts, and now it's how the war is going to end, and that's under President Trump's leadership.
Just to answer your question one more time, the goal here is peace. That's the president's goal. The best goodwill gesture the Russians can provide is to say yes to the offer that the Ukrainians have made to stop the shooting, to stop the fighting, and get to the table. If they do that, that's the best goodwill sign we could see. Obviously, as part of that negotiation, as we're talking about how to end this conflict, there will be a lot of issues to unravel. Among them, not the least of which is the humanitarian concerns, the children, the prisoners of war, all the things that sadly come with these conflicts. But the number one goodwill gesture we could see from the Russians is to see the Ukrainian offer and reciprocate it with a yes.
And next, for Reuters, Daphne Saladakis.
Thank you so much. Could you clarify what security assistance will be resumed? Does this include the PDAs? And why wasn't the minerals deal signed today? What are the outstanding issues there? And if I may, is the relationship with Ukrainian President Zelensky back on track? Do you back him?
Well, let me answer the second or the third. You had two, and then I'll let the security advisor talk about the defense and security assistance. On the second question, well, let me answer first on the minerals deal. As part of our communication today, that is something that was negotiated through our Treasury and his counterpart on the Ukrainian side. And so the president, and you see that expressed, both presidents will instruct the appropriate members of our governments to bring to finality the signature of the deal and the signature of this agreement. So that was communicated today, and that's going to happen. That was not the subject of our talks today. I thought I expressed that on our way in. We were here in pursuit of peace. That doesn't mean the minerals deal is not very important. It most certainly is, and we expressed that today in the statements we put out jointly, that the president, our respective presidents, have instructed the appropriate members of their governments to bring this to finality and to conclusion. The second part of your question was?
Does the security assistance include?
No, there was one after that.
And the Zelensky relationship back on track.
Yeah. What's back on track here, hopefully, is peace. That's what matters the most. I know everyone's looking for who likes this is serious stuff, okay? This is not Mean Girls. This is not some episode of some television show. This is very serious. Today people will die in this war. They died yesterday, and sadly, unless there's a ceasefire tonight, they'll die tomorrow. The president wants that to stop. That's what he's interested in here. That's why we came here. That's why we're grateful for the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia hosting us here. And what we leave here with today is a commitment that the Ukrainians are ready to stop fighting. They're ready to stop the shooting so that they can get to the table and bring about peace for their country and for the world on the security.
Well, I mean, I just can't echo enough. President Trump's president of peace. That's what he's demanding, and he's willing to take tough measures on all sides to drive that home. And in terms of the security assistance, it's the current presidential drawdown authority. I'll refer to the Defense Department on the eaches of what munition was where in the process, but it's the current PDA that will proceed to the Ukrainians.
All right, everyone, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Effective
your
immediately.
patience. And
Yeah, thanks for your patience.
Yeah.
You guys raw.
Right, so let's just focus in on where we are right now. And there's three important things to say. One is there is a deal on the table for a 30-day interim ceasefire, which Ukraine has expressed a readiness to accept. That's the first thing to say. The second thing is that the US have agreed to immediately lift the pause on intelligence sharing and resume security assistance, the weaponry and the aid that is going to Ukraine as a result of that. The third thing to say is that they are making progress to some sort of deal on the minerals that were so important to Donald Trump. There's progress, and they hope to conclude as soon as possible, they say, a deal on that. And the fourth thing to say is that this progress today is just on the Ukraine side. So all this has to go to Russia. And as Marco Rubio said at one point during that, the ball is now in Russia's court. US correspondent Mark Stone is at the White House. So, Mark, I mean, I think that's roughly where we are. And on the point about this ball now being in Russia's court, as Marco Rubio says, interesting that Steve Witkoff, who's a very important man to Donald Trump, is apparently heading to Moscow. So I just wonder what you make of, I mean, look, this is Ukrainians talking to the Americans at the moment. There's still a lot of talking to be done with the Russians.
This is the Ukrainians talking to the Americans. It is also the Americans putting top spin on the way the meeting went, on how they're framing the meeting. And I certainly got the sense from those two gentlemen there speaking on behalf of Donald Trump that they were clearly framing this as an American initiative and that the ceasefire was something that the Americans had pushed Ukraine on. I think the counter to that from Ukraine would be, look, we have always wanted a ceasefire. We've always wanted to stop firing, but we can't until Russia stops, because Russia is the aggressor. Russia is the invader. So this is being framed in a way that clearly suits the American administration. Nevertheless, it is a massively significant moment, a punctuation point potentially in a war that's gone on not for 3 years, but back to 2014. A massive moment indeed, with talk for the first time of a ceasefire, a pause in fighting for 30 days. You've listed the significant parts of that pretty lengthy statement. The 30-day ceasefire proposal, the Americans are saying it is their proposal that the Ukrainians have agreed to. I imagine there's some moulding of language there. Nevertheless, it's important. Clearly, that has to be agreed to by the Russians. That is the big unknown in all of this. Will they agree to a ceasefire? The ball very much in their court. They are the ones that could let all this down now. And there will be a lot of pressure on them. Steve Witkoff, you mentioned him, really significant indeed. This, I think, is his second trip to Moscow. He went, I don't know what it was, about a month ago now, to Moscow, where he met Vladimir Putin. That was, on the face of it, a visit to secure the release of an American teacher who was being held in Moscow. But it became a significant moment in and of itself, because Witkoff met Vladimir Putin. Witkoff said at a conference I was at in Miami about a week ago that he became friends with Vladimir Putin. I established a friendship with Putin, he said. So I think that meeting was kind of an icebreaker for America and Russia and led to where we are now. The last point I would make, I know you need me to wrap, but the last point I'll make, which I think is really important, is that the Ukrainian delegation reiterated that European partners shall be involved in the peace process. That is clearly a Ukrainian insistence that they want Europe to be involved in the peace process. Does that mean European peacekeepers on the ground in Ukraine? That would probably be a red line for the Russians. So this is a big moment. All attention now focuses on Moscow.
Yeah, in fact, I think we need just to talk a little bit further about this, Mark, because as I read this statement, I can see that there's a 30-day ceasefire which can be extended by mutual agreement of the parties, and the Russians will have to agree to that. I can't see much mention at the moment, and these are very early days, of what kind of security guarantees, how that ceasefire would be monitored. I mean, that seems all detail which is to come.
Yeah, it does say at one point both delegations agreed to name their negotiating teams and immediately begin negotiations towards an enduring peace, and this is the key bit on your point, that provides Ukraine long-term security. The United States committed to discussing these specific proposals with representatives from Russia, and then it makes the point that I made, that the Ukrainians say they want European partners to be involved. So when you look at the subtext of these individual sentences, that's where you find the knots that will make all this very, very complex. I think you could argue it's very easy to announce that you're ready to have a ceasefire. It's much harder to maintain that ceasefire, and it's harder still to find the common ground to be able to have a permanent conclusion to all of this. So in a sense, the easy bit is getting close. The harder bit is well beyond. And a cynic might say that all of this announced today is very useful for Donald Trump because it deflects attention from the other whopping story over here. That is the stock markets tumbling as a consequence of his tariffs and the trade wars that he has engaged himself in.
Yeah, I just want to know, first of all, President Zelensky has been, he's made a statement, and it's interesting. He says, our delegation has just reported on the meeting with the American team in Saudi Arabia. Our Ukrainian proposal for this meeting with the Americans consisted of three things: silence in the sky, rockets, bombs, long-range drones, silence at sea, and real steps to build trust in the entire situation where diplomacy continues, primarily the release of prisoners. The American side understands our arguments, accepts our proposals, and I want to thank President Trump for the constructiveness of the conversation between our teams. Today, in the conversation, he goes on, the American side proposed to take the first step immediately and try to establish a full ceasefire for 30 days, not only concerning rockets, drones and bombs, not only in the Black Sea, but also, and this is the difference to the originally Ukrainian proposals, along the entire front line. Ukraine accepts this proposal. We consider it positive, and we are ready to take this step. The United States of America must convince Russia to do this. So we agree, and if the Russians agree, that's when the silence will work. An important element of today's conversation is America's readiness to restore defensive assistance to Ukraine as well as intelligence support. Ukraine is ready for peace. Russia must show whether it is ready to stop the war or continue it. The time has come for the full truth. I thank everyone who helps Ukraine. Look, a long statement, but an important one, Mark. And I just wonder whether, well, part of it clearly is President Zelensky getting back on side with the Americans. A lot of thanks there, clearly. But the second point is that he's saying it's now over to the Russians. Just very briefly, 30 seconds, Mark, what did you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think the tone of it was, or the thrust of it was similar to the joint statement, but I think he put a slightly different spin and was making these out to be their proposals, not necessarily the American proposals, but that's kind of getting into the weeds. I think the top line is that for the first time in a very long time, we now have the prospect, certainly from the Ukrainian side, of a ceasefire for 30 days. All focus now on the Russians to see whether they would go for this. And of course, then the really tricky job of how you maintain that ceasefire, how you find a permanent form of peace, and the extent to which that benefits the aggressor and not the country that's been invaded.